And we're just going to go over to Charlotte Crosswell here, very renowned in ED, to talk about cashless future now. So again, back on terra firma, down from the metaverse, and we are kind of cashless since the pandemic, even more so. So Charlotte, please, over to you to introduce this panel and to go through the insights you have today.
Great. Well, thank you, Matthew, and I appreciate the introduction. And what a fascinating topic we are talking about today. And who would have thought, for anyone doing conferences 15, 20 years ago, we'd be talking about the cashless world in 2021. I'm delighted to introduce my panelists today from very well-renowned companies, Square and Checkout.com. So we have Kaushalya Somasundaram, who's head of UK payments and industry relations at Square, and Grégoire Delpit, who's head of strategy at Checkout.com. Welcome to you both.
Thank you, Charlotte.
Thank you, Charlotte.
So I can't believe there's anyone out there dialing into a fintech stage who doesn't know Square and Checkout.com. But maybe there's some people who are trying to find out more about fintech and financial services in the future. So it would be a disservice if I didn't ask you to just do a short intro on your respective companies. So Kaushalya, perhaps I can start with you.
Thanks, Charlotte. Firstly, I'm delighted to be speaking at CogX today, and albeit it being virtual. So a little bit about Square. Square launched in market in the UK back in 2017, so we've been 4 years in the running. Most of you probably know us as a little white card reader company that is predominantly specializing in hardware. But in fact, actually, we do hardware, software, payments, API, so across the board. We are truly an omni-channel company. As Charlotte mentioned, I head up payments and industry relations in market. And one of the main things that I cover really is across board. I work with financial services partners and banking partners and also regulatory bodies to make sure that sellers, and by sellers, I mean the merchants that use Square, effectively have the most accessible and affordable solutions across board. We believe in economic empowerment, and I think a lot of you probably can relate to that as Square as a company. And we also want to make sure that we're able to help our sellers to get the most sophisticated and secure payment methods across board as well. And I think, and again, it's very, very topical, particularly speaking about cash and cashless society. So thank you again for having me.
Great. Thank you so much. And Grégoire, can I pass to you?
Thank you very much, Charlotte. Super happy to be here. Thanks for having me. Checkout.com is one of the leading cloud-based, global payment solution providers. Through a unified and global API, we serve merchants everywhere in the world, and we help them accept transaction and manage their payments. I think we are namely well known for bringing to the table a very strong tech expertise, a very deep understanding of the fintech market, both globally and locally, because fintech is both global and local, and to help our customer design innovative payment solution, so we can help bring a new business model to their markets. We namely support amazing companies like Farfetch, Glovo, Wise, Revolut, or Samsung, and many more. Thanks again for having me, and super happy to discuss this topic today.
Great. Well, thank you both. Very much looking forward to this. As always, do put questions to our panelists there, and we will hopefully have a few minutes at the end to take some of those. So cashless, and perhaps this would have been a very different type of questions if we'd been doing this 18 months ago. But what a huge amount of change we've seen during the pandemic. Now, Kaushalya, I know you have at Square relatively recently put out a report on cash and the pandemic, and some amazing statistics that probably aren't any surprise to anyone. 15 times increase in digital payments during the pandemic. 1 in 3 payments is now cashless, and a quarter of payments are now in cash. I think I've got those right. So perhaps we can kick off on that and just talk about the role of cash, particularly in the UK and in your market, and what your perceptions are of over the last 15 months.
Yeah, no, happy to kick that off, actually, Charlotte. So one of the things that I failed to mention is that Square as a company, we are predominantly in the US, but also we are in other markets like the likes of Japan, Tokyo, Canada, Australia, the UK, and very recently we launched also in Ireland. And regardless of which market that you look at, the pandemic has definitely prompted people to, shop more locally, I'd say, and also reconsider their payment methods as well. And Charlotte, as you mentioned, you can sort of refer to the Cash and Pandemic report that does cite very many of these statistics. What we really found was that Britons, exhibited a strong preference for cashless payments as a safer option during the pandemic, especially. Luckily, though, for us, actually, the SMEs have proven to be very resilient in the face of these incredible challenges that were posed by COVID and adjusting basically practically overnight to a new consumer and market demand. And you mentioned obviously about one of the statistics, which is really the share of the Square businesses in the UK that went cashless. Has risen more than fourfold actually since the start of the pandemic. So it was roughly just under 10%. And by the time we got to the end of the pandemic, and in fact, shortly after the start of the lockdown, we saw it going fourfold, and it's now tracking around 50 to 60% of our businesses are actually cashless. And which is also interesting given that it's been sort of magnified by the health and safety concerns, of course. But that said, over half of the population that we actually researched also expressed that they like to maintain cash as a payment of choice or an option in the future as well. So for the businesses that we support, this is such an important point to make, in that we want to be able to offer the sellers to be able to accept payments regardless of whether it's cash, card, or mobile payments or any other form. And so giving the option is an important part of it, and the variety is key. And then I think with that, I guess there are a few more statistics that I can refer to, but I think the important point to make there is, the local businesses that were probably providing a cashless proposition back in 2018, where a number of communities where we serve didn't really sort of embrace it. Just in the last sort of 12 months, that trend has been accelerated, and now people are, I think, more open to accepting and paying with the cashless form of payment. So that's one thing. And also, it's also important to note that this is based on a sample where we serve as our market in the UK, which effectively over 75% actually are outside of the London city.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Grégoire, perhaps we could talk about your lessons that you've seen, obviously global business, and talk about some of the trends you're seeing in mobile payments.
Thanks a lot. So first of all, I think indeed we can say that cashless is already a reality today, and for I would say some part of the population. I think if you take maybe a person of maybe in his 20s working in the tech ecosystem in the UK or in Western Europe or in the US, that there is a high probability that this person is not going to use cash on a regular basis. And really because I would say the solution offered to this person, namely through its mobile, are so efficient and so convenient that cash can seem a bit outdated to them. And that's, I think, a very, I would say, interesting trend because in a way technology there has been able to provide something very valuable to the consumer. But we also need to keep in mind that if it's real for part of the population, it's maybe not a reality or an option for everyone today yet, and that we have to properly manage the transition and to properly help everyone get access to any services and not create boundaries, with those innovation. I think maybe two examples. We talk a lot about financial inclusion, which is really, really important because, this trend could basically put people on the side and that would be a shame. I think, so we need to think about the fact that today, maybe I think in the UK, it's more than 3 million of people who are more than 80. And so we also need to be sure that we make this technology accessible to those person. And I think that's two examples of, I would say, how first of all can those trends be amazingly interesting for the consumer, but where we also need to pay attention to not exclude anyone. I think just to conclude, on a positive point with technology and I think if you take, for example, a fintech like Contactless in France and what they've done, using basically technology to provide bank accounts to unbanked people it's a really interesting example of what you can do with technology. And so cashless is a reality, but we need to be sure that it's become a reality for everyone.
And I mean, just picking up on that comment, and obviously there are options now where we are seeing cards being brought into the unbanked and the underbanked. You talk about the elderly and people who just don't want to use cashless, or maybe they're sending a carer in and they don't want to, they don't want to give them anything more than cash. Where do you think we end up with this? Because it's a trend, obviously, it's going to continue. And as it continues, it's going to be more challenging, back to those retailers who only want to go cashless. What's your view on that?
So I think this is very an interesting point, and maybe we're going to discuss that a bit later, but maybe also a point where Europe can learn from other countries, and the specific one, maybe Africa, with all the trend they have, on the mobile payments, and they're basically the way they manage cash, and I would say digital payments. I think it's definitely something where we need to continue innovate, and we need to be sure that we include everyone. I would say that here, I think Europe can make a better job because we're not leading when it's come to those elements. But at least we're aware of it, and we can work on it.
Thank you. And Kaushalya, presumably you have the same issues that is there ever accusations thrown at you saying, well, you're accelerating this trend and you're leaving people behind? Because I know that there's been a lot of people who felt it has been hard, and I'm one of the digitally savvy, I go out with my phone and that's about it. But how do you respond to that from a company who's obviously trying to advance this?
Yeah, I know it's a really good question as well. And I think for us, and Grégoire mentioned about the financial inclusion, we believe strongly in sort of the economic empowerment and making sure that everything that we offer is accessible to everyone, regardless of how big, small, or what type of businesses you are. So that's our primary contact point. And one of the things that I think has helped with that kind of move to potentially, I wouldn't necessarily say cashless, but like a reduced cash usage is really the acceleration of omni-channel, right? So I mentioned at the start that we truly are a company that sort of facilitates not just in-person or card-present businesses, brick and mortar businesses, the traditional, but also the online businesses. And again, we have seen a really amazing trend on that one. So what the pandemic has done is really accelerate the adoption of the digital payments, regardless of, I guess, the merchants that we cover, but also the end consumers that are in these various communities at large. So again, some of the things we have seen, the restrictions in person selling, right, at the start of the lockdown, and shoppers wanting to limit the social contact effectively meant that different forms of payments had to be provided, and as well as different forms of actually ordering. So a few things that we actually launched at the start of the lockdown and the journey was actually things like curbside pickup, click and collect, things that not all of our sellers were offering at the onset. So which has then enabled people to actually embrace, even regardless of the age category, these different forms of payments as a whole. So I think I would say that generally speaking, again, when you look at things like retail, food and beverage, at the start of the lockdown, we saw there was about probably 1 in 10 or 10% of our businesses were actually online businesses. But by the time we finished with the COVID sort of the race in a way, or coming out of it, we are seeing roughly about sort of 46-50% of our businesses are actually now online as well. So they're doing a bit of both, and so I think that's the trend we are seeing that is enabling the end consumers to also be able to adapt digital payments as a whole.
Great, thank you. I mean, Grégoire, let's talk about open banking. And I was moderating a session yesterday with someone from the US who obviously looks to the UK and what's happened in open banking as the next opportunity for them. How much do you think you can advance that? And are you going to see those trends across the world?
I think open banking is really a very interesting trend very based on two things. The first one is that you have new payment rails, and so potentially you can, I would say, better serve some transactions that are not maybe properly served today, or some payment use case. which is a very, I would say, interesting trend. I think the second one is around data and how basically, a consumer can give access to third parties to their financial data. And based on that, those parties can build innovative solutions, either to, I would say, make historical functions maybe more secure, fast, cheap, or reliable, or potentially also building new features and bringing, I would say, innovation to the space. And open banking today is very different, depending of, I would say, the different part of the world. You don't have the same, underlying trends. So for us that wants to operate globally, it's something I would say really interesting because we can pick, I would say, the best of the different geographies, and we're super keen, to participate to this trend because we see lots of value in the kind of service that we could deliver to the customer using this.
Yep, great. And and you touched on data there. I mean, essentially people could say that actually you're more data companies than payments companies because it's all around the collecting that data and then using it in the future. Perhaps we get you to talk about your data strategy, and is that something you think is possible, and how that's going to affect the future of the products and services you're rolling out? And let's come back to you, Grégoire, first.
I think data is core, within a checkout strategy. We use data first to, I would say, improve the service we deliver to our customer, because leveraging data today, you can strongly improve the performance of the global service. Of course, accept more transactions, but also optimize lots of things and decrease, I would say, friction in the checkout page for the customer. So that's, I would say, on our core business, something we use. But we also see data as, and namely potentially to open banking, but also other topics, options to build new value-added services for our customer. So at the end of the day, payment can be, I would say, faster. Merchant can generate more value from their payments and try to better serve their customer. So this is really something where we are hiring a lot. If you're a data scientist or if you're a data expert, everywhere in the world, I think we have a seat for you at the office, I would say, and I know we're super keen. That's super interesting.
Yeah. And a seat at the office be anywhere now, I guess. It doesn't even have to be in the office.
Yeah, you're right.
And at Square, how much is that data going to drive forward your product strategy? I mean, it must be underpinning everything presumably you're doing at the moment.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, the short answer, Charlotte, is yes. Everything that we do essentially is underpinned by data. And like I said, I think often, companies have evolved, right? So, and then there's a lot of convergence, as we've seen in the market as well, in the UK and more broadly in Europe as well. Driven also by and facilitated by the regulation. So again, we talked a little bit about what are the trends that are driving towards potentially a digitally savvy community of consumers, as well as making the data rich. And obviously, Greg spoke about open banking. But in addition to that, we've seen very many good developments in the recent past with regards to things like increase in contactless limit, open banking, offering propositions for end consumer to take control of their own data. So, we talked. We when we think about actually use of data, we think of it as how is this ultimately, because we are the custodian of this data on behalf of our sellers and consumers. So how are we able to effectively take this data and provide the best solution that, as I mentioned before, that is accessible and affordable? So we look at it probably from sort of three lenses, so to speak. We want to make sure that our the sellers and consumers, they really know what data is actually available and or accessible to them at large. So there's an element of education because they need to know what data we hold on their behalf as well as what is generally available, and then also understanding their collective financial needs, so that we can then plug in the data to provide the right solutions for them. So beyond just payments into other forms of platform offering as well. And the third thing that we also look at is we want to make sure that the right to refuse to sort of offer data or access to data is in the hands of the end consumer as well. So providing them the flexibility to be able to share or not share. And so I think things like GDPR has definitely helped because that gives you that option to sort of opt in and opt out. But culminating or accumulating all of that together helps us to form the right, or build effectively the right solutions that is fit for the market. So I think, yeah, we look at data as a principally what drives all of our solutions in market.
Yeah, and presumably the thing we're going to see so much change. And perhaps just to continue that theme of data, talk about data privacy and tokenization and what Square's doing now.
Yeah, no, that's a really interesting question. So again, going back to the trend, right? So you were asking that question around what's happening to the digital. I think it's digital economy. It's essentially it's no longer a nice to have. It is actually a must have, right? So that's one of the first things that's driving this change. So assuming that is the way that the market is moving, then we also know that a lot of the payments are becoming, or the methods of using payments acceptance or payments offering is also becoming digitally driven. So as a consequence of that, you also have a lot of rich data, but equally you have a consumer base that's also digitally savvy, but security underlying that, it's still a little bit of a black box for most people. So one of the things that we've looked at, and I think a trend that we are seeing, is really around tokenization. And it's essentially substituting the sensitive customer data, such as card numbers, account numbers, numeric code, whatever that might be, that can be used into a complete transaction without necessarily revealing the underlying data itself. So generally speaking, we look at the benefit of tokenization in two forms, both from the seller lens as well as the consumer lens. From a seller lens, it provides, we believe, the security for the cardholder. So tokenization will significantly reduce the risk of customer data loss, for example, by reducing the number of parties that are in that transaction. And if you use a system of encryption, it makes sure that you're never really able to reverse engineer to reveal the underlying customer data. So that's one aspect of it. The second part of it is really around the security of our sellers. So again, we make it easier for businesses to accept payments. So with tokenizations, businesses have a much easier path to be able to meet the PCI requirements, for example, which is a card requirements in the industry, well adopted standards, because the customer's data is always effectively encrypted and is inaccessible in the case of hacks. So again, yeah, so that's the other trend that we are seeing, is around protecting the customer data beyond the enrichment of the data itself.
Great, thank you. And checkout.com, how much are you doing to work with the merchants to make sure they understand the open data, the power of open data? Is that something you spend a lot of time on education with them and helping them through?
So we have different type of customers. We have, some of our customers they have payments experts internally, and people where basically, we're more working with them to try to realize, I would say, all those things, their amazing imagination wants to bring to the table. So obviously, those merchants don't really need to be educated because they're already experts in the field. And then we have, maybe merchants who are maybe a bit earlier in their journey, and so indeed there is a work and a responsibility from our side to really explain that and explain, I would say, what's the value of what these data, what they can do with it, I would say, but also how they should be very cautious with it in a way, because I think to some point we discussed it's a big responsibility to manage this data. I think another important part is that our role is also to protect, I would say, the merchant and the customer, and so to be sure that we also provide the pieces of technology that are going to create, I would say, a secure and reliable environment for them. I think, tokenization that we just discussed is one of the amazing feature that technology provide to make those kind of things, and there is lots of things like that.
Thank you. And before we turn to questions, I'd love to just talk about scaling and growth, particularly in Europe. Greg, perhaps you can talk about your learnings from other markets and where you see the opportunities, but also what are some of those challenges?
So Europe is a very interesting space, to scale a fintech for different reasons. The first one, I think, because there is lots of other companies innovating in the space. Initially, I would say from Europe, and as Square, coming from the US. So we have this, I would say, very strong innovation, and that's pushing everyone to do more things. The second thing I think which is interesting in Europe is the regulator. Sorry, I've played a very interesting part in the past like 10 years, where the regulator in Europe understood that it has to favor innovation, namely in fintech, and create the foundation for that. And I think that's something we should be really, really happy, because most of the time we tend to see the regulator as someone who is going to create some complexity, and there it has not been the case. That they've created a foundation to make innovation possible, and lots of entrepreneurs have then jump into this opportunity to build those amazing companies that we've seen. And if you've seen that much fintech in Europe in the past 10 years, I mean, the regulator has to take credit from that, and we should be thankful of this. Having saying this, and all the amazing things we can do in Europe, and at checkout.com, we're strongly investing in Europe at the moment. We are opening new office. We are hiring some team, sales team, tech team, to develop both, I would say, the product, the tech, and the business, because there is lots of talents. So Europe is amazing, but I think we should also continue looking at what's happening outside of Europe, because fintech is one of those industries where and I don't really like this term, but what we used to call emerging countries. I think they've done so well that we should not call them emerging anymore. But fintech is one of those spaces where, instead of just replicate what has been done in the US or in other part of the world, they try to build something new and try to, I would say, take the best of what we had and make something even better. And there is lots of things that we should look at and that we should learn from. I think what has been done in Asia with the wallets, with the super apps. What has been done in Africa with mobile money, with the way they manage cash, on delivery and stuff like that, are some stuff that we should look at, because we can learn a lot from that.
Yeah, I've often said that we talk about fintech and being fintech thought leaders and global leaders, and then you look at what's happening in some of those markets and the different approach, more tech into fin than fin into tech, and you get very humbled by it. Look at what's happening with Nubank in South America as well. It's just incredible, the growth that we're going to see, and then that adds to the art of the possible. Kaushalya, but one final question before we go to audience questions. Same for you. What are some of the opportunities for that scaling and growth? Any challenges? You've been there a while now. You've come from obviously a big global bank before that. What's the difference, and what's the most exciting things coming up?
Yeah, no, I think we are operating in a very, very interesting and hugely promising market, is what I would say. And I think we also got a very progressive regulator, which definitely helps. But similar to what Greg was saying, we launched, as I mentioned, back in 2017, and very recently we also started our European expansion aspirations and growth plans. And just last month, actually, we launched in Ireland, which has been a huge success for us. And what we've done maybe slightly different from the previous time, again, based on the lessons that we learned from our UK launch, is for the first time we launched a full stack integrated business, both, basically in a new market. As I mentioned, historically we were known for like a little white card reader, but imagine we're offering hardware, software, API, payment solution, all of that in a truly global integrated cross-product offering, which is in the highest form an omnichannel solution to all of our Irish businesses, so they can all sort of have accessible solution in this ecosystem. And then so essentially when you look at our suite of products, as I mentioned, it is fairly broad. It also enables both in-person, remote, as well as online businesses as well. And we took this approach because, as I mentioned, from our lessons, that we really felt that the ecosystem play of launching a platform approach was really the right thing to do. And I think as again has been mentioned before, I think it's important that we offer the sellers, the right solution, because every sale does matter for these sellers, especially in this very tough and challenging times. And we as a Square also believe that the sellers should be able to use us in whatever shape they like us to be used. So for some of our sellers, we are a platform of choice when it comes to integration. And for many others, we are also a system of record. So we want to make sure that we are actually covering the breadth of the sellers to accommodate them, regardless of their the size and shape, and
Great.
and industry.
Great, thank you. So we've got a couple of questions from the audience now. So the first one is, in the catering sector, tips play a vital role in remuneration. Important in the UK and the US, but real pivotal it's so important in the UK and EU, but pivotal in the US, as we know. And so how do cashless systems ensure these workers are digitally paid tips? Probably one for Square, perhaps more. Did you get the question? Effectively, how can we encourage people to put tips onto, is it too tempting for people just to tap and go and that's it and not add the tips? And how do we make sure the workers themselves receive them? And do you have a provision for that?
Yeah, no, 100%. I think, the way that as I mentioned, the propositions are changing. Like, for example, when you book a table, you have software to enable that. When you actually take payments, self-service, you have an option to actually use QR code to make the necessary or the required order. When it comes to payment, you also have software that enables you to add tip to the overall bill as you choose to make the payment. So I think this is now prevalent in most of the offerings that are in the market. We certainly are offering that kind of end-to-end solution because we do think about that from a seller perspective, what's best for them, and then also from a cardholder perspective, what's most convenient for them as well. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, I think we're there. And then again, coming back to you, Square has introduced a Cash app in the US and allowed cashlessness to spread to millions more people. Is it coming to UK and Europe? And how big is the super app going to be?
So Cash app is already, I guess, let me just take a step back. So we have obviously all of our seller businesses that we support. We also have the Cash app proposition, which for most people know it as a peer-to-peer proposition. We are already in market. We have been in the UK for a few years now, actually. And is one, again, that has grown significantly throughout the pandemic because not more people, again, I think one of the questions, Charlotte, you had at the onset is like, how are we actually facilitating and enabling people to be able to make payments from one person to the next, but also build payments and various other. And this is how we are enabling people to do that because we are using the Cash app proposition. You're able to transfer the money movement very easily and more securely. So yeah, we are already in the market and we will continue to expand across Europe.
Thank you.
Charlotte?
Yes, thanks.
Yeah, if I may, I'd just like to, I'd like to say something, on the first question, because I think that's basically definitely where technology can play a role, which is, I would say that, when it's come to tips, what we do today using technology, is a positive elements in that direction, based on basically 2 or 3 things. The first one is like, when you look at what's happening today, like for example, in the riding apps or, in the delivery apps, basically the app is going to encourage you to leave a tip to the person, who delivered you the service, and is going to explain you that, it is important to this person on his day-to-day life. The second thing is like, you create basically a bias by, trying to say to the person, like, were you happy with the services? And if yes, then, maybe you should give something. And then I think 2 things, which is like, you make it easier to do it, because either you are, normally like you don't have the cash or you don't have the coin in your pocket, so you don't do it. And here, like, you just have it, you can do it on the spot or later. And for basically, those person where I would say the speed and the velocity of access to the cash is super important. Using, I would say, new services that have like been pushed by the scheme, like for example, pay to card, or, I would say using peer-to-peer transactions, you can, I would say, increase the velocity of the cash and increase the access. So I think it is typically where I would say, technology can understand, why it's important for those person and build a service that's going to encourage that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the technology is all there. We just have to remember to apply it accordingly. And I think it's the same, we've seen this in the charity sector, people collecting on the streets, and then they don't have the reader. And of course, people just aren't paying cash over the last 18 months. So we're going to have to find ways to change things dramatically. Maybe on that note, final question really is talk about the magic wand. What do you want to see changed? Cross-border payments. It's still, we've glossed over it because it's not really the topic for today, but incredibly hard, still in work to be done. What needs to change to make us go cashless in the right way? Grégoire, let's come to you first.
I would say that cross-border payments has made amazing progress in the past 5 years. I think the key, I would say, is not it's not on payments. It's more around all the services we can provide to merchants to help them, I would say, make it easier to manage those cross-border transactions or order more global. But I would say that today, if you want to manage a cross-border transaction, it's fast. Depending on how much you want to pay for the transaction, you can either have something which is like almost instant, or that's going to take a couple of days. If you're someone and you want to basically send some money on another part of the globe, you have like lots of fintech, like for example Wise, that are providing those kind of services. I think it's more all the things around, the payments and the transaction, where we need to work to be sure that it's even more, I would say, convenient for user.
Great. Thank you. And Kaushalya, let's finish with you. And what's the top of your wish list?
I think at Square anyway, we believe it's about giving the choice to sellers and then the end consumers. So in some ways, I think there are benefits to having potentially like a cashless society, but at the same time, we also want to give the choice and option to those in that cohort of people who do not have access to digital form of payments. So I think it's important to recognize that, I'd say. So I think, again, feeding into some of the things that have happened over the last 12 months, right? So contactless limit increase, for example, was a great example of trying to give people the choice to be able to pay with a card payment or a mobile payment that is which is perceived to be a little bit more safer. So I think that's one aspect of it. The second one is cashback without purchase, is one that's coming up down the line as well with the FCA regulation. And I think it's, again, a great initiative to be able to offer, particularly people in the local communities, to be able to go and cash money if they don't have money, and to be able to pay in the same location and use it for purchases, or to take it back with them to use it elsewhere. So again, I don't know whether we're necessarily, at least in the short term, going to see a cashless society. I think all the signs are showing that, yes, the use of cash is reducing. But again, it's about going back to giving people the choice. And if it means, digital forms of currencies, again, that's probably a very big topic in its own right, or providing people the opportunity to use cash, mobile, card, whatever form it takes. I think it's important to give people the choice. And from a seller perspective, I think it's important for them to be able to manage their cash flow in the most optimal way, because ultimately they need the money to be able to rotate and pay for their bills, etc. So again, any form of payment acceptance that offers them the flexibility, I think is also going to be key.
Great. Well, that was a whistle-stop tour on where we're going, our transition to cashless, and fascinating to listen to such amazing representatives of the biggest innovative companies that we're seeing around the world in this space. I do urge you to read the Cash in the Pandemic report from Square, and I know on checkout.com have just put out a report on the new state of retail as well, with some amazing insights on there. So something to leave over. Thank you so much for your time today and sharing your insights. Really appreciate it.